So I'll pray for us and then we'll begin. Father, we're grateful that we can learn the truth. Help us to trust in what you have to say about creation, and help us to trust your word over man's word, knowing that your word doesn't change. Man's word often does, actually always does. And we pray that you would help us to experience your presence as we operate in your truth. We do pray for all who are traveling, that you would give them travel mercies and you would keep them safe, keep them healthy, keep them well, and may they be a blessing to whomever and wherever they go. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I thought I would do, session 2, just on biology, and then I realized there's just so much of biology. So I had to cut it into 2 sections. This week we'll do natural selection, and then next week we'll do mutation, and after that we'll do geology. But knowing how it's going, geology probably could get cut into 2 as well, because there are fossils, and then there's sedimentation data, rock data, and then there's radioactive dating. All of those you probably haven't heard the other viewpoint, because if you're like me, you are a product of public school education, right? You don't get the other viewpoint. But in fact, there's scientific data of the other viewpoint. It's just not in your public school textbook. And that is alarming. And the sad part is some secular geologists know it. They know it, yet they ignore the data because it doesn't fit their worldview. So today we're doing natural selection. And natural selection is really the driving force behind what we call evolution, right? Evolution is a model. I say model because, in fact, scientists have to say model because it's not a fact, right? Theories and models, they describe and explain, right? Models describe what is seemingly how the world works, okay? Models can be edited all the time. In fact, evolution, as Darwin wrote it in The Origin of the Species, is not quite the same evolution that the modern scientists believe today. They've actually added things on. Because Darwin actually had no idea about genetics and how genes are passed on, DNA. He had no idea about any of those, right? So it's been added on. So models change, scientific models change, scientific theories do change. We can't hold them as the gospel. We can't hold them as unchangeable. That is not the field of science. Now, evolution is a model that states that simpler organism slowly changes into a more complex organism over millions of years. Okay, that's the basic model of evolution, from simple to more complex. Now, there are some distinctions. There's like microevolution, macroevolution. The secular field does not make that distinction. Because Christians can actually believe and say, yes, we do believe organisms do change over time, right? And I'll show you examples of that. Organisms do change over time. Where we would draw the line is the kinds. One kind cannot become another kind, right? That's where we would draw the line. So in one sense, if people are saying, yes, do you believe organisms change? We can say yes, but we have to be really careful what we're saying yes to. Okay, it's not just flat out any change, right? So this is the model for evolution. Slowly changes over time, simple to complex. That's important. Slow change, simple to complex. And you might have seen pictures like this, right? There's like a mammal here, like a cat-looking thing, and then it suddenly, slowly becomes a whale. Okay? Why I put it here is, even in high school, I was going to youth group, I was going to church, right? My pastor was not an evolutionist, okay? He was Presbyterian, but he was not an evolutionist. So he really tried hard to show that, it doesn't make sense, like out of randomness, you get that. But I'll tell you, if you spend 8 hours a day hearing it over and over again, right, you start to believe it. So after high school, I would say I still believed in evolution to a certain degree. I would say I was not a six-day creationist. Maybe more of a theistic evolutionist, just believing, God is there, but he set up the evolution. What actually got me off of it is actually an unplanned meeting with a gentleman named Philip E. Johnson. And this is not Philip Johnson from, Grace to You, right? John MacArthur's Grace to You. Different Philip Johnson. Philip E. Johnson was a retired law professor at UC Berkeley. Okay? And he had a stellar record, as in he was tenured before he retired, right? Being a tenured law professor is one thing. He also clerked, basically like an internship, for Justice Antonin Scalia, Supreme Court Justice. And if you know the law field, if you can clerk for one of the Supreme Court justices, you're the cream of the crop. In fact, if you look at the Supreme Court justices now, many of them have clerked for previous Supreme Court justice, right? John Roberts clerked for former Supreme Court Justice William Rehnquist, Chief Justice, right? Like this, it's a big deal. Now, what happened? He became a Christian and started reading the Bible. And he looked at the data supporting evolution. And for a legal mind, you might be like, well, he's not science-based. Sure, he's not. But lawyers, one thing they have to be is logical. You have to show logically how certain things fit, and the data actually proves the story. Does the evidence stand? So I was invited to his house not because I knew him. My pastor at Berkeley knew him, and then he invited me and my other friend, and we were doing both biology major. I was only a biology major because I didn't want to write big papers. But now I end up writing big papers anyway, right? But that's okay. But it was my freshman year, and I really think that was a life-changing experience. First thing, Professor Philip E. Johnson had a stroke, which got him to retire. The stroke did not affect his logical mind. It affected his sense of time. So for 3 hours straight, he started lecturing about how evolution can't stand. And he didn't know he was talking for 3 hours straight. But one thing that caught my attention was this. Mammals are more complex than fish. So fish evolved to amphibian, then reptile, and then mammal, right? Mammals are way more complex than amphibians, reptiles. But then for some reason, when you look at the marine animals, you get a marine mammal. So you have to say it went back in, right? And that also probably took millions of years, according to the evolutionary theory. Here's the spin he had. Now, evolution is slow, right? Yes. So limbs can't just suddenly become fins in one generation, right? No, right? No. It would be slowly changing. Now, if it's partially fin-like and partially leg-like, how can that animal survive? It can't run away from predators because the legs are fin-like. It can't swim away from predators because the fins are leg-like. So how would that actually increase the survival rate to become a marine mammal? I couldn't explain it. And that really was the pebble that he put in my shoes. That's the only thing I really remember. It's like you can't explain it. And to this day, my friend who also came with me, he's not an evolutionist. He's a cardiologist, right? He's a doctor. He's a cardiologist, still a Christian. And he still shares the gospel with his patients and prays for them. And then he's like, I can do it because I work for a Catholic hospital, right? But it's like, it really changed our views. And for all 4 years, as we were studying together, I would check on him. So, dude, he took a class on evolution. It's like, did that change your mind? He's like, no. Right? It didn't. I am grateful for Philip E. Johnson for that talk. He passed away a couple years ago. But he's actually the main guy who coined the term intelligent design. He's the guy who coined the term intelligent design. And you'll hear that a lot. Again, you might see this, right? Like an ape turning into an upright human. That's really the propaganda of evolution, right? Okay, there are two driving forces for evolution, natural selection and random mutation. And we're only going to go over natural selection today. Random mutation gets its own lesson. So what is natural selection? Natural selection works like this. And this is really the crux of Darwin's theory of evolution. So Darwin is looking at finches and animals in the Galapagos Island, right? And he looks at it, and there's a trend. There are more animals that are born that can normally survive. Okay, not every animal that is born actually survives. In fact, many of them die, and that's because each individual animal has to compete for limited resources, whether food, mates, or space, right? Any of those shelters, right? They have to compete for that. And when that happens, some animals do die, right? Now, some individuals have traits, so physical characteristic that helps them survive better, compete better than other individuals. And these animals with the better physical trait, differing trait, actually survives, and we call it the survival of the fittest. And the reason why, now, survival of the fittest can be observed in a limited sense with individual animals. The reason why we reject this as the main reason as to how we have such diverse kinds of organisms is because it presupposes death. If this is the main reason why we have so many different types of animals, then death exists since the beginning of time. But Darwin did see that, right? He observed it. The problem is he put a blanket over the whole animal kingdom, and I mean the plants too. Every living organism, right? So individuals that have those high survivability traits, they pass on their genes. The youngs inherit. And then with each new generation, the traits that improve survival become more common. And I like this picture. I got this from Bob Jones University Press, Life Science, 5th edition. You get bunnies. Evolution requires variation. You cannot have natural selection with a clone, like many clones. There needs to be some sort of variation. So you get, we're doing one trait right now, okay? So we get like 5 little bunnies and 5 big bunnies. However, if you count the carrots, they're not 10 carrots. There are 6 carrots, so not all bunnies can get a carrot, which means some will die, some will starve to death. But you'll see that for some reason, having a big trait, bunnies that are bigger actually got the carrots quicker or faster or more effectively, one reason or another. So one of the big bunny died, but 3 of the little bunnies died, right? So when that happened, only in the pool, in the gene pool for the bunnies, there are more big bunnies that are reproducing to make big bunnies. They're not necessarily bigger. And then there are fewer little bunnies that are reproducing to pass on the little bunny genes, right? So because of that, the trait that helped the bunny survive to get the carrots in our case, right, allowed the bigger bunnies to survive, and their genes for being big got passed on. So overall, there are more bigger bunnies than smaller bunnies. And that's what Darwin observed. But what you'll notice is that it's not always bigger bunny always wins. It just depends on the scenario, right? If there's a predator that targets bigger bunnies, then the smaller bunnies would survive. But natural selection, again, it's random, and then whatever trait that helps the animal or plant to survive at that scenario, in that circumstance, will pass on, okay? So that's natural selection. So it has to be a random thing. It's a random trait. It is slow. Natural selection is slow because you need generations, right, to show that. Now, with animals and plants that reproduce much quickly, then yeah, it would be relatively quicker, right, than humans. But it has to be slow. Hence, time is a major factor in the theory of evolution. Time is the major factor. Again, for natural selection, it has to increase survival. And I will repeat this. Natural selection has to increase survival. It's random, and only the trait that allows for survival gets passed on, and it becomes more common. Okay. So here is an example you can see during the Industrial Revolution in England. Okay? Industrial Revolution allowed for factories to form because they could burn coal. And as you know, when you burn coal, it's messy, and the smoke makes the surrounding area darker with soot. So naturally, there are moths, right? There's supposed to be moths, but it works for butterflies too. Moths of various colors, right? There's some lighter moths, and then there's the darker moths, and there's the lighter moth, okay? Now, after the Industrial Revolution, the environment changed, okay? The moths didn't change, the environment changed. And all of a sudden, when the trees are covered in soot, or walls are covered in soot, it's darker. So the predators have a hard time finding moths that are darker. So what happens? That is a trait that allows for higher survival, right? So more of the darker colored moths survived, while the lighter colored moths died out in droves. So the genes that get passed on would be the darker colored genes, right? So because of that, after the Industrial Revolution, that's what they've noticed. And of course, when they cleaned things up a bit, the lighter colored moths came back, right? But that is something we do see in terms of that the secularists would say that's natural selection, right? And you can do that with foxes too. That's a fennec fox, that's a desert fox, and then there's a Arctic fox. Two different environments, and there are traits that allow them to survive in these vastly two different environments that help them survive. So bigger ears to hear predators, right? Shorter fur so that they don't die of heat exhaustion, right? Fur that is colored similar to the sand color, right? Those are all the traits that help these foxes to survive in the desert, and they have been naturally selected, they would say, to survive in the desert. And then here we have Arctic foxes. They have thicker fur because it gets colder. It's white, so it's in the same color as the snow around them. Their ears are much shorter. It keeps the heat in, right? You don't want big ears losing heat, right? That's why mommies tell you to wear beanies, right? The heat doesn't get lost. So So they would look at that and be like, see, there's natural selection. And we would say, sure, yes, we do see changes. We do see generations that get passed on with certain genes that help them to survive depending on the environment, right? But the question we have to ask is, what is the limit to natural selection, right? Because what's something we haven't seen is that natural selection cannot create new genetic information. What do I mean by that? Whatever the ancestral fox there was, I'll explain more, that came to the desert, had the gene for shorter fur. And over time, the ones with the shorter fur survived the dreadful heat of the desert. And that's the main type of fox that survived. And the other would be the same idea, right? The ancestral foxes who got to the Arctic region or cold region had the genes for the thick fur, and only the ones that had the thick fur survived, right? So it wasn't creating new information. We would say it actually had the information to begin with. And I'll show you a modern example of that. So the genetic information was already present in the population. And over time, the genetic information within the population narrowed down based upon the environment or circumstance that favored that specific characteristic, that trait. Okay? So I would argue it's actually elimination of other traits rather than gaining a new trait that helped them survive. Why can I argue that? We have something called artificial selection. Artificial selection is different because it is not based upon nature. It's not random. When we breed for dog characteristics, we actually select specific dogs that show the traits that we desire. Okay? So, have you ever wondered why are bulldogs called bulldogs? No, they're not mated with bulls. They're a different kind, right? Bulldogs were actually bred to have big jaws, very strong jaws, and you can see that. Their head's huge, their jaw's huge, and small torso. French bulldog, English bulldog. Why do they all have that? There was a cruel game in a couple hundred years ago where they would send out dogs to grab onto an angry bull's nose, and the dog that actually flips over the bull, because the bull, you don't want your nose grabbed, neither does the bull. The bull is shaking like mad, and the dog that can hold on and to make the bull flip over wins. It's a cruel, cruel game. Animal abuse for sure. Many dogs died, but that's what they bred the bulldogs for. Now, that's artificial selection, right? In nature, it wouldn't make sense to have a small torso and a big jaw like that, and right? It's not randomly selected. And that's the same thing with like hunting dogs, herding dogs, right? They have traits that allow for whatever the humans wanted, right? Herding dogs herd sheep, or if they don't have sheep, they herd humans, right? Hunting dogs hunt small games. If they don't have games, they chase balls all the time, right? Retrievers, why are they retrievers? They were bred to retrieve hunted animals. So we got an ancient dog, and we would say that a whole group is called the canine group, the dog kind, right? And they were bred for specific traits. Long fur for animals that live in colder regions, short fur for animals that live in warmer regions, right? So there was an ancient dog that had all these traits, but then these traits were narrowed down. What do I mean? Well, let's take a look at a Saint Bernard and a Chihuahua. How many generations of purebred Chihuahuas can produce a Saint Bernard? And if I ask that question, you would say, don't be ridiculous. You get a purebred Chihuahua to produce what? Chihuahuas. As long as the Chihuahua is making babies with other Chihuahuas, you'll only get Chihuahuas. Same thing with poodles. Poodles and poodles make poodles. St. Bernards and St. Bernards make St. Bernards. Why? Why don't new traits show up? Well, that's because the genetic info has been bred out over time. Right? Purebred dogs won't make sense if genetic information just can pop out. Right? New genetic trait can pop out of nowhere. In fact, purebred dogs would be extremely impossible and unreliable. You wouldn't be paying thousands of dollars for those golden retrievers. If genetic information can pop out and one day your golden retriever gives birth to a poodle, right? Or a golden retriever gives birth to a St. Bernard, you could probably sue the American Kennel Association, right? It's like, you promised me with the certificate this was a purebred golden retriever. Why? Because other traits were bred out. So same thing with foxes here. How many generations, if we put Arctic foxes in the desert, can we get desert foxes? None. First of all, they wouldn't even survive, right? They're not bred to survive. They don't have the traits to survive in the desert. Same thing, the vice versa. What that means is the ancestral fox had the most amount of genetic variations, right? And we can see that we have more genetic variations than what normally shows, okay? And you've seen it, right? A mom with blue eyes and then a dad with brown eyes can sometimes create something like green eyes or something, right? Like that's the case for us. I don't have green eyes. She doesn't have green eyes. But they're genetic variations that when they mix together, it shows up. But what's impossible is mom and dad that only purely have brown eyes, right? Like my parents, wouldn't have created, a green-eyed baby, right? That genetic information isn't there to begin with, right? And of course, there's mutation, and I'll go over that next week, okay? Ancestral fox had the most genetic variations, and modern foxes are more specialized, so they can only produce foxes with those specific traits, okay? And you can't import new information. You can't download new information like that. So how would the Bible say it? How does the Bible explain for so many variations of traits and so many kinds of animals? What do I mean by kinds? Kinds, I generally, they're not species, okay? You can have multiple species of the same kind. What do I mean? Wolf, coyote, dog, same kind, different species, okay? And there are even like different species of wolves, right? Gray wolves, right? But generally, they're of the same kind, and generally, the ones of the same kind can actually breed with each other. That's why you can have hybrid wolf, right? You can have a half wolf, half dog, or half wolf, half coyote, right? Same kind. It's at the family level rather than the species level, right? Same thing with cats, big cats, leopards, jaguar, right? Tigers, they're the cat kind, right? So, in fact, we see that all throughout. We don't see the word species, we see kind. Fruit trees, according to its kind, according to its kind, according to its kind. So God actually created multiple kinds in the beginning and set them in the Garden of Eden. And you can see that with animals too, sea creatures, right? According to its kind, according to its kind. So the information I gave about how do we have marine mammals, right? How do we have marine mammals? Is because God actually created marine mammals in the beginning, right? A mammal that evolved from the sea, so to say, right? Fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal, didn't go back into the sea to become a marine mammal. And I've explained already how a mammal becoming more fish-like wouldn't increase survival, right? It's a slow process, so it's not one generation later the legs become fins. It would be partially leg and partially fin, but that trait wouldn't pass on because you can't run away as fast as if you had legs, and you can't swim away as fast if you had fins. So partial legs, partial fin, this chimeric organism would not survive, and if it doesn't survive, it's not survival of the fittest. That trait can't get passed on. But the Bible actually makes it clear. How about God made a very diverse kinds of animals in the sea? Some are fish, some are mammals, some are whales, some are sharks, right? It's already been set that way. Now, again, this does not mean species. They're kinds. They're kinds of sharks, okay? Doesn't mean they were all the same species that we see today, because species can form over time. Different color, different fur length, right, with mammals, as they go to different locations. But different kinds were already there since the beginning, right? Same thing with land animals, too. And this explains as we go over Noah's flood, right? This is a loggerhead musk turtle, very cute. And this is a razorback musk turtle, very cute. Same kind, different species, right? I just like turtles, but they're the same kind. They're the same kind. Why is this important? Because evolutionists will argue, when we get to the flood part, I will bring it up again. They're going to argue, how did Noah fit all these animals, every species of animals in that ark? You got to catch them. Kind. It wasn't a poodle, Saint Bernard, wolf, coyote, no. 2 of the dog kinds. Whatever the ancestral dog looked like, I assume much healthier and bigger, right? They went in. Not poodles, chihuahuas. Really, purebred is inbred, right? It's so narrowed down. Kind. That's why you could fit it in, right? And we'll get to Noah's flood. There's so much data, evidence for Noah's flood, it's alarming to doubt it. Okay, so this is what it would have looked like. I flipped it, I turned it 90 degrees. So there's a dog kind. And from the creation, it would have branched out. You know, you get different types of dogs, like different fur length, different colors, right? Because all of those genetic information that a dog kind would have needed, because God knew ahead of time, would have been in that ancestral dog, okay? So they're branching out. They look like different dogs, and that's beautiful, right? But then there's Noah's flood, so only one kind goes in. And that kind still has a lot of genetic information because it's so close to creation. And then we get branched out, all of these branched out. In present day, we see so many different types of dog kinds. Coyotes, wolves, whatever, right? Poodles. And then same with the specific bird kind, right? They all branched out, but after the flood, only one kind, one pair made it into the ark. So, and then they had to branch out again. Okay. Dinosaurs, sorry, they don't. They do make it to the ark. Let me tell you, dinosaurs do make it to the ark. And again, the argument is, how can you fit a T-Rex? Well, you can fit a baby T-Rex, right? Has anyone seen like a baby alligator? How big are they? This big, right? They're this big. If they're just born, they're born big as the egg, right? Can't God just bring a small alligator or a small dinosaur in our case that's about the size of like a chihuahua? For sure. It didn't say God brought all adult dinosaurs. God brought just 2 of each kind. And I do believe dinosaurs survived. They just didn't survive too long because after the flood, the earth's condition was horrific. Just a glimpse. Remember, there were volcanic activities underground because the ground split open. So lava's flowing all around, and then water's spewing out too, hot groundwater. And then there are ashes from the volcanoes, and then there's rain. So the air is really humid. and then the atmosphere is getting covered by volcanic ash. And when the atmosphere is covered by volcanic ash, what doesn't get through? Sunlight, right? And when the sunlight doesn't get through, the temperature drops. So the humid air, a lot of liquid and water in the air turns to what? When it's cold? Ice, snow. We get the ice age. And the ice age is not quite favorable for a lot of big reptiles that are cold-blooded, right? And I would say maybe even some of them still survive. That's why we have reptiles still, right? We do have reptiles. But the giant ones, it's not favorable. And second of all, when they're giant animals, humans like to hunt them because you get more food out of that, right? And then there are portrayals of dinosaurs in various ancient civilizations. And you have to wonder, how did they know what a stegosaurus looked like if they didn't even live close to the fossils? Right? I'll show you pictures of that. Why are they found in Burmese monk temple? In the 1500s. Why is there a picture of not a picture, but like a painting, right? An artwork of stegosaurus, like. So again, I think many dinosaurs survived, but they did go extinct. That's why we don't see them, right? So, do we have any evidence of one kind changing into another kind? We don't. We can't see it, we can't observe it, and they would say that's because it takes millions of years, right? But let's go over why it can't take millions of years. So do we have any evidence of changes occurring in kind of animal and plant? And we would say, yes, within the kind there are changes, not outside the kind, right? So one problem we do see is in the fossil record. This is not the main thing about fossils. We'll get to the fossils in a couple of weeks, okay? It's the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion is a sudden appearance of fossils of very many types of animals and plants in quote-unquote 541 to 515 million years ago. I do quote-unquote because we're going to go over why we don't believe in millions of years. So all of a sudden, we get all these types of animals and plants that just appear in one very low layer. That's a very low layer in the fossil record. So the secular geologists would say this is very, very early. This is really early to be seeing this many kinds of animals, with species of animals, right? So when we take a look at the Cambrian explosion, we get sudden appearance of multicellular marine animals. Animals that are quite complex, okay? Simple organisms are bacteria, like one cell. Multicellular is multiple cells. We are multicellular creatures, okay? Dogs are multicellular. We have trillions of cells working in us, okay? And we would say almost all of the present major groups of animals are represented there. Marine animals, right? So sea stars, jellyfish, fish, they're all there. And there are no transitional forms between the layers. What are transitional forms? These are fossils that look like, okay, this fish is developing a limb, like legs from fins, right? They see that and they say that's a transitional form. But early in that stage, you don't have many layers to even look for transitional forms, okay? So, remember, characteristics of natural selection. It's random. Therefore, if it's not by design, it would have to be a slow process, right? Think about design. When you are an author and you're writing a book, if you're thinking about what the book is going to be like, you can actually type it up pretty quick. However, let's say you're writing a book and you're randomly generating every word that comes next, that is going to take a while, and it won't make sense. And if it doesn't make sense in evolution, does it pass on its gene? No. It does not pass on genes if it doesn't make sense, right? It's folly, right? And it has to increase survival. All of those things have to be true. So the question we have to ask is, how is it possible that the sudden abundance of life appeared when evolution is supposed to be slow? I don't know. Right? Why do they all appear around the same time? Right? If evolution is supposed to be slow. That's not a slow process, that's a quick process. Right? And what explains the lack of major changes within the marine animals that are similar to the current ones? Right? Now, I will say there are some extinct ones, right? Trilobites, I'm going to get to that. But there's sea stars look like sea stars. Jellyfish look like jellyfish. How come they're not changing over the 500 million years? So those are really hard questions. Briefly regarding the fossils, well, how would a biblicist, how does someone who believes in the Bible explain that? I will tell you briefly, the fossil record does not show the record of how life came to be. Fossil record shows the record of a tremendous catastrophic death. So I would argue a lot of the marine animals that have been fossilized have been quickly and brutally buried by a humongous force of water and mud. And does anyone know what kind of event would cause a quick mud flow and a lot of waves that would be hard for some of these marine animals to escape? The flood. Right, the flood, right? So in one sense, the fossil record of those marine animals, Cambrian explosion, we would say that's not when life came to be. That's when a lot of lives died and who couldn't escape. The fossil record actually shows more so of the animal's ability to escape. Why are the slow animals like sea stars and jellyfish and bottom-dwelling creatures, why are they all buried? Well, they were at the bottom and there was a huge wave because the earth shook. Right? Earthquakes happen, tsunamis, and torrential rain and lava. Right? And those things just quickly buried them. We're going to go over how fossils form as well, so we'll talk about that. But that's how I would explain that. So let's talk about this, trilobite. And people would be like, see, it's extinct, it's no longer existing. How can you say that evolution isn't real? Let's talk about this. Trilobites appear around 400 million years ago, and I put it in quote. I don't believe that, but that's what they would say, secular biologists and geologists. The curious part is, trilobite, remember, natural selection, it goes from what to complex. It has to be what at first? Simple. Okay? Trilobites are actually rather very, very complex. They actually have compound eyes. Compound eyes means it's not just two eyes, there are multiple eyes, many, many eyes. And those eyes are made out of calcite, which is a type of crystal. Oh, that's really odd. So there are calcite eyes, crystal eyes, that look like actually rhomboid. Rhomboid is, rhombus looks like a kite, right? All four sides are congruent or equal in length, rhombus. It's like a square is a rhombus, but it has 90 degrees. But a rhombus doesn't have to have 90 degrees. So their eyes are made out of these rhomboid, so like three-dimensional rhombus-like crystals. I don't know about you, but that's complex. That actually speaks of design. It's hard enough to draw with a marker a nice rhombus. It's another thing to have a three-dimensional rhomboid. Thousands of them in a creature like that. And those rhomboid calcite eyes produce two images. Wow, right? And then it has to... It's somehow able to survive making sense of these images. And that formed 400 years ago. And the question is, how can you explain the complexity of the trilobite? It's not simple at all. It's not a bacterium. Right? And it suddenly appears. No transitional forms before that. So there's not like a pre-trilobite. It just appears. Right? The last thing I want to go over is called irreducible complexity. This is a huge concept that Dr. Michael Behe comes up with in Darwin's Black Box. Darwin's Black Box is actually rather an old book. It's a couple decades old now. But when that came out, it was so groundbreaking that evolutionists started writing books against it. You know it's groundbreaking when people respond, right? When it's not groundbreaking, it's like no big deal, right? Like, why do we not talk about like the, flat earth stuff, right? Like, why don't I have a class on that? It's not quite too groundbreaking, right? It's not like sweeping people, right? It's not like creating a chaos, right? It's not a big deal. But Darwin's Black Box did make a big deal. Darwin's Black Box, black box, airplane. It's a box that has information in that, and then the black box, the concept here is that outside the black box, you can't really have that information. You don't know the information without opening the box. Well, Darwin didn't have information on genetics. Darwin didn't have information on mutation. Darwin didn't have information on the DNA. Darwin didn't have information on molecular biology. That's Darwin's black box. So Michael Behe actually goes with that, and his argument is there is something called irreducible complexity. What do I mean? It sounds like a complex word, but it's actually rather simple. There's a system that has multiple parts, and in our case, we have a mouse trap, okay? That's a system, right? It's a system that stands on its own, and it works by itself. You don't have to connect it anywhere. It's a closed system. It's designed to catch mice. It has multiple parts, okay? It has hammer, catch, spring, right? Holding bar, and platform, okay? Simple. It's a simple system, okay? Each part, however, is necessary. Each part is necessary for the whole system to work. That's irreversible complexity, okay? So, for example, without the spring, would the mousetrap work? No. Without the hammer, would the mousetrap work? Even if it has everything else, if one part is missing, you might as well not have a mousetrap. That's irreversible complexity. And that same thing with car engines, right? Why are we scared if there's something wrong with the engine? If one thing is missing, right? Spark plugs are not working. Well, good luck, right? The motor's missing. Someone stole it. Yeah, good luck, right? It's irreversibly complex. Now let's review natural selection again, right? Natural selection characteristically is random, slow, and increases survival. So the question is, if it's random, how can these necessary parts individually, independently evolve? You can't. No one in the right mind would say a mousetrap was, there was a piece of wood over millions of years. It got cut down through erosion and, lightning strike and animals, they scratched their back and then it got cut. And then it made it into a nice rectangular prism. But then there's an iron ore that fell because there was an earthquake. And then over time through water and rain, it carved it into actually iron spring. And it just happened that it fell onto that piece of wood that was carved out. Right? It wouldn't work like that. Even if that were true, if you have even 90% of the mousetrap without the 10%, it can't work. So the question is, it's random, it's slow, it increases survival. We get it, it's random and slow. Let's go with that. It won't increase survival until every single piece is together. It's not just every single piece exists, every single piece is assembled together. Okay. That's irreducible complexity. And that is Darwin's black box. Darwin didn't know how complex life actually is in the technology that existed in the 1800s. Another one, human body. These are major organs, right? Heart is right there, your lungs, liver, stomach, large intestine, small intestine that leads to the large intestines, right? That's the human organ, and then you get blood vessels flowing through, right? Now the question is, can a human heart increase survivability without human lungs?
No.
Not long. You can't survive without lungs. Okay. Now you might say, well, we have heart-lung machine for now. Yeah, that's designed. Okay, and actually no doctor would just hook you up to heart-lung machine so you can live for years. It's just a couple of hours while they do a procedure, right? Can a human heart evolve without human blood? No, because what's the point of the heart that doesn't circulate the blood? And the question we have to ask is then which organ evolved first? It's a slow process, it's a random process, then which organ evolved first? They can't answer that. And the point is, it doesn't matter. Even if you got a fully functioning heart without a fully functioning lungs, without a pair of fully functioning lungs, that heart isn't going to pass on. Right? Without a fully functioning liver, the blood's not going to filter through, and it won't increase survivability. Does having only one organ increase survivability? And the answer is, of course not. Because human body is irreducibly complex. Another example is human blood. Human blood is able to clot on its own. Did you know that you get a paper cut and you might not even know it, but then the bleeding will stop if you have a normally functioning body? Why? Because there are proteins along the way in your blood that tell the clotting factors you gotta stitch it together. Right? Now, how many of you know that a blood clot is actually a deadly thing? Yes. No one wants a blood clot. Yet, human blood is so designed that the clotting factor is less than 1% of the blood, so it doesn't clot randomly, but it somehow has the ability to communicate with proteins and different factors to go here and stitch it up. And after you're done, you're done. And your brain's not telling it. You could be asleep and your blood will clot, but not so much that you would have a blood clot. Now, with the reality of the fallenness of the world, yes, blood clot does happen. Genetic, dietary choices, all those things. Stress, right? But normal human body that's healthy isn't meant to work like that. Human blood is irreducibly complex. Okay? So you need the whole system or there's no survival. So you can't have natural selection driving it to get from simple to complex. And how can a whole system evolve slowly and successfully? And the answer is you can't, right? And that works for even your whole cell. Your cell, you have trillions of cells in your body, and your cell needs energy to survive. That's why you eat. And it needs to break down the food into energy that your cell can use, so your cell can actually live. This is a diagram of this. You can't even really, it's hard to get a picture of this. It's so complex. And I guarantee you there are even parts that we don't even know that's occurring. Okay, this is as far as we know, right? You get glucose, and then there's a special protein that breaks down glucose, which is sugar. It breaks down sugar. And then those two pyruvates, those two broken pieces of sugar, gets broken down further. And then electrons get taken out, and then it's crazy. I won't bore you with all the steps. If you do molecular biology, you will learn all the steps. as far as we know, right? And then it goes to mitochondria, and then it creates a whole bunch of ATP, and it needs oxygen. That's why you breathe, right? If you stop breathing, your cells will start to die, right? Now, creates energy for the cells, and without it, you will die. And why am I emphasizing death? You need survival. Survivability is the name of the game in natural selection. Now, hundreds of different proteins are involved, and each single step is necessary. And again, the question is, which protein evolved first? It doesn't even matter if you get 98% of the proteins evolving at the same time. If the 2% are missing, it could be the difference between life and death. The cell just didn't live, right? That is how complex human body is, and it is at a molecular level that you can't even see it. Right? You need a microscope. DNA. There's more information in your DNA than 30 encyclopedia books in one cell. One encyclopedia book might be this. 30 could be like this, okay? That amount of information is stored somehow in each of your cells. So trillions of your cells have that much information in a coded information book. That's irreducibly complex, okay? So hundreds of proteins are used to copy DNA to make new cells and make RNA, which is instruction to make proteins. If one step is done, can you make protein? If the one step is gone, you cannot make protein. If one step is not evolved enough, you can't get any of it. The whole process fails. It's irreducibly complex, right? Now, there are some mechanisms that correct the errors, but how do you even get the mechanism that corrects the error, right? Your body has a proofreader. Your cell has proofreaders that actually corrects like mistakes. So, I mean, this is the whole step. That's the DNA, double helix, and then it splits, and then there's a protein that puts, that makes the error, I think, once in a billion base pairs. So it's like, that's pretty good. If you can write billion words and you make one mistake, wow, you know? Right? Or something like that. I gotta look up the exact number, but it is a crazy amount. And then that instruction is taken outside the nucleus, and then there's a different tRNA that says, okay, this belongs to this amino acid, so I can make this protein. Any step that's missing, you can't get the final product protein, and without protein, we don't get us. We are made out of proteins. Proteins are building blocks of life. Okay, that's a problem. And there's so many questions we have to ask. How could a slow evolution explain the existence of the DNA pathway from DNA to protein? We can't even make this happen in a lab where you can, it's not as efficient as a human body. Okay? That's why we have to actually borrow like bacterial cells to make protein and other things. This is the molecular basis for natural selection, and that is problematic. It is way too complex to have been simply evolved. And another is, how can you have information without a programmer? If you buy a laptop and or if you have a smartphone, and you have an application, and some tech-savvy people know how to do it. They can open up a page, and there are all these codes, lines of codes. It's like hundreds of pages, lines of codes. No one is thinking, yes, a toddler got onto the laptop and then just banged up words, right? And it somehow made a nice app that you can deposit checks, right? You can check your bank account. No one's thinking that. But for evolutionists, you have to, and human cell is more complex than any app that has been written. So how can you account for the existence of information without the informer, existence of codes without the programmer? That is a hard question. And how could the whole genetic system come into place by accident? languages, when we speak, when we write, when we type, when we text, have design and purpose. And they have meaning. And you have those in each of your cells. How could that be driven by a purposeless accident? And that's Darwin's black box. You can't explain that. All right, any questions or comments before we close in prayer? That's right. And that's why we will get to geology, where some guy did radioactive dating on a recently formed rock from a lava flow. Because, volcanoes still explode, right? So they did a sample of basalt, that's a type of rock, and they did radioactive dating. And you would get maybe a couple years, right? No, he got 1.1 billion years. So you got to start questioning, is that even trustworthy? And he did another experiment where he took the same, another rock, and not the same rock as a newly formed lava, and there are different types of radioactive dating. There's uranium, lead, there's potassium, argon, right? There are different chemicals you can use and look for different types of chemicals. He did 3 different types of radioactive dating on one same rock. He got 0.5 billion from one, and then he got 1 billion from other, and he got 1.5 billion from another. And the question is, which radioactive dating can you trust? Yeah, so I will actually go over each one and, show pictures of them. It's pretty astounding what people trust just because it's found in a science book. Okay. All right, let's pray. We're grateful, O Lord, that in the end truth wins. And we're grateful for the ample data we have to trust in your word. And the best evidence, the strongest evidence, still is Genesis 1. And we're grateful that your word stands firmly despite the time passing. Your word is not theoretical, it is factual. And help us to trust in your word with all our lives. In Jesus' name.